Welcome back to Cosmic Comics. Today's modern iteration of the character Death within the pages of Marvel made its first appearance alongside Thanos during the Thanos Wars story arc in Captain Marvel Volume 1, Issues 26 through 33, published in 1968. I'm going to be covering that story arc in a future video, but first let's take a look at who and what Death was in classic Marvel before Thanos showed up. Who was Death through the Gold and Silver Ages of Marvel? I've tracked down 8 appearances of Death prior to Thanos showing up. I think that this is all of them, but I'm sure somebody will let me know if I missed something in the comments below. Let's take a look at the shifting faces of Death in chronological order. Death's first appearance is in Captain America Comics Volume 1, Issue Number 1, published in March of 1941, written by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. This might just be a skeleton, but we'll go with Death. We're shown a skeletal figure in a top hat playing chess with Rathcone. Rathcone is playing chess on a board where the figures represent real people who die as their pieces are removed from play. In the story portion of the comic, Death never appears. Death's next appearance is in Human Torch Comics, Volume 1, Issue Number 5, published in the fall of 1941, written by Jack D'Arcy. The Human Torch is fighting Namor. He's stuck inside of a tunnel that is quickly filling with water. Death is depicted as a ghostly apparition that waits and laughs. The Scythe and Dark Hooded Cloak give this a classic Grim Reaper look. Once again, Death is used as a character on the sidelines instead of an active participant. In Adventures into Weird Worlds, Volume 1, Issue Number 4, published in 1952, story number 6 of 6 for this issue gives us no writer's credit, but the art is attributed to Bill Everett. Donald Drake has been staying at home in isolation to ensure that he doesn't die from a plague that has hit his community. Eventually, the cabin fever sets in, and he decides to invite over all of his friends who have yet to contract the disease. Everybody's having a swell time, and the fellas get excited when an uninvited guest, Marcia Lang, arrives to the party. This is the first time in the pages of Marvel that we see Death represented as a young woman. And my, she sure is talking a lot for a character that speaks so seldom in modern Marvel. As expected, the plague hits the party. Most of the guests flee, but Donald and Hank argue over who is going to take care of Marcia, who shows no signs of panic or fear despite being surrounded by a deadly disease. She decides to stay with Donald since he was kind enough to allow an uninvited guest into his house and shelter her. Now that everybody is gone, Marcia is happy to have Donald to himself and gives him a passionate kiss. Donald knows something is wrong and soon discovers that he can't breathe. As the plague sets in, Donald sees her real face, the face of Death. This story is interesting because we see Death taking an active role for a change. Also, this is the first time we see her represented as a woman that turns into the more classic Skuld version of Death. Death shows up next in Suspense Volume 1, Issue Number 25, published in 1952 in the story I Died at Midnight, with no writer's credit but art credited to Jim Mooney. We're shown a thief cracking into a safe just before midnight. He gets it open but is surprised by a secondary alarm inside the safe. This leads to the thief being discovered by the night watchman, whom he shoots and kills. He makes it outside but is being pursued by the police. He attempts to shoot the cops but wakes up inside of a prison on a hospital bed. He faces trial and is sentenced to death. After being strapped into the electric chair, a man wearing lots of eye makeup appears at his execution, claiming to be Death. The criminal protests that he would have made it, but for one small mistake with that secondary alarm. But Death assures him, as of midnight of this night, his fate is sealed no matter what. This is an interesting approach because it is playing up determinism over free will, and Marvel usually takes the other approach. We are then returned to the scene of the crime, where the thief repeats his robbery, but this time he disconnects the additional alarm. He makes it back to the safe house without being caught or followed. All he needs to do now is lay low for the next few months. It appears as though he has beaten death. Years later, on the night he would have faced execution, the thief decides to celebrate by walking down to the prison and seeing if death is around. Yep, his character literally goes out looking for death. He gets a cab to take him to the prison and notices that the cab is making really good time. The driver tells him that's because he never stops for traffic lights. The words sink in on the thief. The driver turns towards the back seat, and we see that the driver is Death, who informs him that nobody sees Death except the people he's supposed to meet. In this issue, we are once again faced with determinism and see Death taking an active role in telling us that we all have a day and an hour, and that the choices we make pretty much don't matter. When your hour or time has come, that's it. It's come. Next, in Amazing Adult Fantasy, Volume 1, Issue number 9, and note that this is the magazine that respects your intelligence. This is another comic filled with several short stories. The Man Who Captured Death is written by the one and only Stan Lee, with artwork by Steve Ditko. This story plot gets recycled in Thor Volume 1, Issue number 190. An old scientist is distraught that there is so much work left he wanted to do, but he knows it'll only be a matter of time before he succumbs to old age. If he wants to continue his work, he needs to overcome death. He spends the next few months building a machine to capture Death, or more likely one of Death's embodies, but more on that in a future episode. The professor is exhausted and sits down for a much-needed break. In this moment of rest, Death comes for him. This time, Death has a bit more of a Nosferatu look to him. As Death nears, the professor hits a button which holds Death in place. He's done it. He's captured Death. But the poor old fool thinks he has done the world a favor by halting Death in its tracks. Death stops on Earth, perhaps the entire universe. Farmers who are spraying their fields are losing their crops to bugs who won't die. Large predators and rats begin to multiply. Even germs and microbes refuse to die, and soon hospitals are overrun with patients needing care for the infections that won't go away. Perhaps most dark of all is the panel where they mention the elderly who are begging for Death to end their pain and can't find it. Meanwhile, Death waits, but he does plead to be free. Once the lack of Death makes national news, the man sees the error of his ways. He releases Death, who offers to give him peace, and we all know what that means. This story stands in direct contrast to the previous story. In the previous story, we were told that no man could change the hour of his death, and in this one, we were told that one man could change the hour of death for billions. Granted, the difference might have been that the second gentleman took Death out of the equation. One might say that he cheated Death. We keep the short stories coming in Tales of Suspense, Volume 1, Issue number 34, published in 1962 with Who Am I? Once again, no writer is attributed, but the artwork comes to us courtesy of Steve Ditko. In this story, a man appears lost in a fog and can't remember who he is. Another man wearing a hat and purple sports jacket and sporting a goatee arrives and uses the power of hypnotism to remind him who he was. The man was a trapeze artist who fell and died. Death explains that he was delayed at a previous appointment. We're told that they are now in limbo and that Death has arrived to free him. For the second appearance in a row, we see Death walking off with somebody while assuring them that he will bring them peace. In Silver-Sulfer, Volume 1, Issue Number 8, published in 1969, written by Stan Lee and penciled by John Buscema, Death shows up in a flashback. Just van Straten was a captain with his heart set on treasure. The captain demands that the crew sail into a large storm and threatens to kill any man who abandons his post. The entire crew was lost to sea and their souls all put to rest. Once the captain passed, neither heaven nor hell wanted Captain John. Even death denied him entry into her realm. She cursed the captain to sail the seven seas on a voyage without end as the Flying Dutchman. All we get to see of Death in this issue is the back of the cow. Death's final appearance before the Thanos War is in Journey into Mystery, Volume 2, Issue Number 1, published in 1972, with the story, You Show Me Your Dream, I'll Show You Mine. Written by Steve Skeets and penciled by Jim Starlin. The story starts with Mark Russell, who has been trying to stay awake in order to avoid his dreams. Whenever he falls asleep, his dreams take him before death. This look for Death, despite having a male appearance, is very close to the classic look many of us recognize. Death keeps bringing Mark here because he killed another man. Mark had recently completed his first contract as a hitman. Of special note here, Death is once again constrained from taking Mark's life until the proper moment. A woman is in the dream, and Death calls her the Angel of Retribution. This woman, Laura Warmer, wakes up shaking in her bed. Like Mark, Laura has had the dream repeatedly. For both of them, the lack of quality sleep begins to take a toll on their lives. Mark turns to drinking late one night and leaves the bar drunk in search of another bottle. While Mark is driving, Laura climbs out of bed and sleepwalks into the street. Mark can't believe what he's seeing. It's the woman from his dreams. He swerves to miss her and he runs off the road. The accident kills Mark. Laura returns to bed being none the wiser, and her nightmares never bother her again. In this story, Death seemingly takes an active role to force Mark's hand. In the end, though, we are told once more that Death had to wait to claim a killer's life. I'm going to drop any philosophical questions or over picking apart these stories because all of this is far from canon. Still, it's interesting to see where some of Death's characteristics first appeared in the pages of Marvel. Most notably, Death as a female and visitor as shown in Adventures into Weird Worlds, or wearing purple as seen in both stories from Tales of Suspense. So, there we have it. All 8 appearances of Death prior to the Thanos War. Beginning with the Thanos War, the character of Death becomes much more homogenized across the Marvel Universe. There are some exceptions where Death appears differently, such as Kid Reaper, but there are usually, although not always, but usually good reasons associated with those exceptions. Thanks for watching. Feel free to hit any of the buttons below. Oh, and by the way, I have a second YouTube channel, Cosmic Peppers, where I do hot food challenges, talk about pepper history, and do pod reviews. I'm out.